I might give you a little story. We're going to talk about chin dimples, which are also chin creases and any variation thereof. Who has in the world of the famous best known for his chin dimple? I gave you a hint, yes. Anybody have a suggestion?
World famous?
Famous, yes.
What was the hint? Did you say your
Who in this world
Yeah.
is famous, is famous also for their chin dimple?
I was thinking one of the talk show hosts, but is that?
That's incorrect. Anybody have any
That's
other
the problem.
suggestions?
That's what's his name with the big chin? Probably not.
That's Jay Leno. Is that who it is?
Prominent child.
I'm really bad at famous people, Dr. Hall.
Okay, well, I bet you've heard of this person, Kirk Douglas.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I bring him up, besides the fact that he's still alive, almost 100 years old, and is famous for his acting, and he has a famous son who's famous for his acting, who also has a chin dimple, by the way,
Michael Douglas?
Michael Douglas, is that when I was studying chin dimples, I found a family that was about 5 generations. And the propositus was a medical student.
Wow.
So I asked him if we could pursue his chin dimple family history, because he had told me there were a lot of people in his family with chin dimples. So I then got pictures of all those family members, and a few of them came in. And it was clear that chin dimples were autosomal dominant. The type of skin dimple was not totally consistent. You could go from a dimple to a cleft, but most of the people had the same type of dimple, but not necessarily the same degree. And then 20% were non-penetrant who had it. So I was thinking about publishing this, which, by the way, I never did. So I sent a
But now you
letter.
have another family. Wasn't Dr. Skinner telling
Yes,
you
yes.
he's got 4 generations?
So there's a gene out there for that if anybody wants to spend some time and effort. Now the 2 families. But I sent a letter to Kirk Douglas asking him if I could use his name but call it the KD chin dimple, first inheritance pattern. And I didn't hear anything for about 3-4 weeks. And then I got a letter that said I would be happy for you to use my initials for this chin dimple. And down at the bottom there was a PS that said, I typed this letter, I'm his secretary. And she said, you got this because I'm from Kentucky, which is where I'm from.
Nice.
So I thought I'd do you a favor. So I had permission from Kirk to do this if I ever chose to. Michael Douglas's chin dimple is also circular, but not as deep. Kirk Douglas's is very deep. You ready? Okay. Shall we begin? Just, you really don't need this, but chin dimples are considered a normal variant. We don't know quite when they become a minor anomaly. If they're part of a syndrome and consistent, then we might consider them minor anomalies. And minor anomalies are usually things that are of no consequence, although cosmetically you might make a point for and against chin dimples, and I'll tell you why later. And they don't require any repair, but as many minor variants, they never go away, and so they're always there to deal with. And just to make a point, you don't have to look at this slide in any critical way, is that the more minor anomalies you have, the more likely you are to have major anomalies and be a part of a syndrome. The critical number appears to be 3 or more minor anomalies. So it is important to have some idea of what's minor and what's not. Some other minor anomalies or normal variants are simian crease, accessory nipples, ear tags and pits, fifth finger clonidactyly. Now, let's use ear tags and pits as an example. 1% of the normal population has either ear tags or pits. And so that makes it a normal variant. These people are otherwise normal. But if you look at the cat cry syndrome, about 60% of them have preauricular pits. And so in that syndrome, they become a significant physical characteristic. So it is important. Another thing is fifth finger clonidactyly, incurving of the fifth finger towards the thumb side of the hand, is a very common feature, as you can see here. And it has to be more than about 30% off the midline before you consider it significant. But even then, you don't consider that significant necessarily, because you want to know if there's any anatomical reason for it. So if you see rather than parallel flexion creases on the fifth fingers that are narrowing medially, that suggests that the middle phalanx here is triangular. There you already have an anomaly, and then it becomes a useful feature. We see this in Feingold syndrome with microcephaly and intestinal atresias, but incurved fifth fingers, which are frequently malformed. In the United States, about 17% of the individuals have either chin dimples or chin creases. How do I know that?
When you said famous personalities, we have a lot of like Bollywood stars, like actors in India
Yes, and
that have chin
and I'll
dimples.
explain why I do. First, I'll give you the story. The USA statistics are my statistics. And what I did was I was at a meeting and I didn't have anything to do. It was in Boston. So I went to the Commons and sat down with a pencil and paper and watched people walk by. And I made a note of who didn't have a chin dimple and who did. And I didn't differentiate which they had. And that's what it turned out. And the Commons would be a very heterogeneous population walking through there. Tourists from foreign countries, lots of other people from countries who had moved there and lived. So that's not an unreasonable figure. In India, you can see that the frequency is less than that in the United States, except you notice that 84.6%, that is in certain populations in certain areas of India. May relate to consanguinity rates, not sure about that, but it can be very high. And I'm told, you can correct me on this, that the Indians consider these marks a beauty mark. Okay? And so did Michael Jackson, because he had one made. I'll show you a picture of Michael. It was a lower cleft, not too dramatic, but he felt that he wanted to have one of those as a beauty mark in his many alterations of his facial structure. As you can see, they can be inherited as autosomal dominant. Here's the medical student as a young boy and as an older medical student. You can see here that they're pretty circular, not a lot of change. He's developed a little bit more of a fat pad. Mostly chin dimples develop where the chin fat pad is. And the chin fat pad can be quite large, mild, and moderate. Usually not non-existent, but sometimes it is. And this is the gentleman whose family we studied to get the data on the chin dimples. Here are a group of other people. Here's Kurt. Now you see Kurt has a circular chin dimple except at the top. This is sometimes called the T, or teardrop type of dimple. You can see Michael there, the vertical crease he has had surgically made is obvious. Usually the creases tend to be lower on the face from the lower lip to the end of the tongue, or end of the chin. This guy is a little bit well developed. You even get the impression sometimes that there's two chin dimples. Some are very dramatic, but I don't think that's the case. I think The tissue is bound down here to the area where the lower mandible fuses in the midline. And that's a reason for the chin dimples. Here's a guy who has a circular one, well-developed chin dimples. Then he has this line across here, which is a horizontal line. That's not part of the chin dimple. Has no significant meaning, even though a lot of people make note of it when they are reporting cases, particularly cases with facial malformations. The guy with the white gray hair, the young man, he's a model. And the guy on the right is a politician from someplace, I think New York. Here's a collage, and I have a lot of collages. Here's a mother who has a chin pad. She has a child who has a very small chin dimple. So variability from parent to child. Here's a father and son who apparently has exactly the same degree of chin dimple. And here's a girl who has a syndrome, who has a lower chin dimple without the chin fat pad being very well developed. And here's a guy who has a Kirk Douglas-like chin dimple. His son has just a very minor indentation. Chin dimples are present at birth. They can change a little bit as far as their overall configuration with time. And as people get older, the chin dimple, as they lose the fat tissue, tends to be less. When I say older, let's say past 60. Here are a bunch of kids with creases, lower fat pad creases, here and here. Here's a boy who has very minor crease. This girl doesn't have an absolute crease. What she does show is there's two prominences here. This is called notched chin. This may be where the lower borders of the fat pads are larger than the chin area, and they show up like this. You will see people from time to time. When we get to the philtrum, we'll show you a lot of things, but you see this vertical crease here? That forms usually with people who have short philtrums, this distance from the columella to the upper lip, and they form a horizontal crease, particularly when they smile. If you ever watch Julia Roberts smile, she gets one of those every time. Now here are more syndromic-like clefts, particularly this woman where it's very low, actually it almost goes under the mandible, the superior border of the mandible. And then she has a child who has a bigger one, but it's still low as well. This child has a little bit better fat pads than she has. And then another crease, chin crease. And then this guy, he's an academician of some sort, has the circular, fairly deep dimple. Here are some unusual dimples. I used to have a theory that if you had in order to have a prominent chin dimple, you had to have a large fat pad. And you didn't get dimples or creases without a fat pad being present. But here you see a mother and her child who have fairly significant fat pads, but no dimples or creases. So that theory's unusual, but then you see that horizontal crease I told you about. And then you see this tissue in these two boys who have two entirely different conditions, both unknown. It looks like scar tissue, but it isn't. This is just the way the chin developed as far as the fat pad. It looks more like it may be some chronic drainage and irritation and maybe some inflammation. The reason I show you those two lower ones is that there's a condition called whistling face syndrome that sometimes can look a little bit like this. And here we go. If you look at some of these, like here, they have muscle contractions constantly, so they look like their face is whistling, and it forces over a long period of time in utero and extra utero, they develop this buildup area here that's not discolored like those two I showed you before. And that's sometimes called the H type of dimple. To me, it doesn't look like an H most of the time. The boy on the right, upper right, might fit that category. And then there's chin creases that are distinct in that they're small, but they're not where they should be. They're up high. Can't see them in this particular picture. But Setless syndrome, which is an ectodermal mental retardation syndrome, has, when they have chin dimples, which is about a third of the time, their chin dimples or creases are superior, giving it good value as a physical characteristic. Because I'm not aware of any other syndrome that has these high-placed, narrow creases. Here's two women with Gorlin and Chaudhry-Moss syndrome, where they have dimples that vary. These are sisters, by the way, and they have that notched type of fat pads. There's about 10 cases of this, and these two sisters are the only ones who have this. So it may be that this is a familial, non-genetic, non-malformative part of their phenotype. Here's a child who has, or two children, that has the short syndrome. S stands for short stature, H for hypersensibility and hernia, O for ocular depression, which means deep set eyes, Rieger's anomaly, which is the dark of the eye, having mesodermal dysgenesis or webbing, and sometimes associated with enlarged corneas and glaucoma. And then they have delay in tooth eruption. They have, I'll show you the table, but they have a characteristic face. The ali are underdeveloped. The face is triangular, and about 60%, I think it's 60%, will have these narrow, low-set creases. We've mentioned most of these particular features. They do have, in other parts of their body, some lipoatrophy, so they look thin, the size being short, and they have about 61% presence of usually a vertical cleft, lower portion of the face. There is an increased incidence of diabetes mellitus in these individuals, and there is a gene for this. So this is a syndrome where a low-set, narrow crease is very useful if you're looking for a child with a specific syndrome who has any of these other features.
So is that 100% of the time?
No, 61% approximately. Now, these are low set, so sometimes in the clinical pictures, the kid will be looking down or around, and you won't see that, even though they're reported in the paper. There's another set of kids with the short syndrome. Looks like Russell Silver, but they're small and their head's not large. And I think there's one other picture of a family individual I had with this. You can't see his chin dimple or crease because it's under the chin area. And these are his two normal siblings for you to compare what a syndrome can change phenotype in a specific family versus those who are unaffected. There's about 10 to 12 disorders that have a mild increased frequency of chin dimples or creases. You can see in this child here as a dimple. This one's supposed to have one right there. And you can see they've actually said that 4 of the 7 of their cases with this particular partial trisomy has chin dimples, and they've marked it. You rarely see chin dimples listed as a physical characteristic in malformation reports. You almost never see it listed in a table. So it's important that you recognize it and put it down as part of the features that that individual has. Here's a duplication 20Q, of which 3 of 4 had the chin dimple. Since there's not very many cases of this, if we had 100 cases, it might not be very significant, but right now it is potentially significant. And here's a girl that has familial distal arthrophosis but she has the notched chin without the dimple or crease. Sometimes you'll get the notched chin with the crease. So chin dimples and clefts usually represent a normal variant. It can be a minor anomaly in rare instances. It can be useful diagnostically when the frequency, location, and character of the lesion is carefully documented. And close relatives of a person with chin dimples and clefts should be observed for the same or similar lesions, because you may see a child with syndrome who has a chin dimple, and you make the assumption that it's either normal or abnormal. And if you do that without seeing pictures of the parents or siblings or more distant relatives, you can make an inclusive decision that it is part of a syndrome when actually it's totally separate and another familial feature of that family. So before we go to the philtrum, any comments or questions? Okay. Now, I'm getting you into a particular bind here, but you won't be able to look at a magazine, a photograph, TV, or your friends without looking very critically at the face, which is the purpose of this. Just tell them you're not really looking.
Yeah, let's all look at each other. I see this transverse crease in everything.
There you go.
Polka has a little.
I have.
A beauty mark polka.
All right. I gave this talk about 2 months ago when John Kerry, after he retired from the editorship of his American Journal of Medical Genetics, had a fest script. And so I wanted to do something different and keep myself busy. So I thought, well, philtrums are something that I've seen very little about in the literature. And most of the things that we've seen is long and short philtrums. Any other descriptors you don't see. And most of the people like chin dimples, they do not put in the physical features of the philtrum as if it wasn't there. It's actually considered a beauty mark. So that the philtrum, the word means love, and in other cases, beauty. So it is important, and it can be quite attractive. A couple of things. This is a gorilla, lowland gorilla, I believe, here and here. And you notice that they don't have a philtrum. And remember the philtrums from the columella to the upper lip, and it begins with the grooves on the side, and not grooves but columns, and then in the center there's a dip, and that's the groove. No, that's the groove. But they don't have them. Most primates, except for one, don't have philtrums. And to clarify something, the definition of philtrum is classically what I've just told you, the center part. A lot of people use philtrum to include the entire upper lip, and particularly for shortness and width and prominence, but that isn't correct. And here you see let me point back. Notice how hypoplastic the nares are in this gorilla. This is a South American monkey with even more hypoplastic nares. Note you see no evidence of lines whatsoever. So one has to assume, in animals at least, that it requires normal nasal development, particularly the lower portion, for the philtrum to develop. Here you see a human who has an acrofrontonasal dysplasia syndrome, in which the typical nares are uplifted, the eyes are wide spaced, and there's no development of a philtrum there either. So as we look at syndromes, you may see this repeat itself in that any syndrome that's associated with severe nasal hypoplasia will either have an abnormal philtrum or no philtrum. Who can tell me who this individual is? Now, we always block out eyes because we think that can identify people. Well, I can tell you the filter can identify people too. And when I tell you who this is, if you don't know, you'll know it immediately.
Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yes, yes,
Oh, yeah.
Benedict Cumberbatch. I mean, he is so weird in his facial structure, despite the fact that he's a wonderful actor. You can pick him out without the eyes. You don't need the entire face. To define what we're talking about, the philtrum is from here to here, here to here. And the lateral borders are defined by the columns, which are here and here. Sometimes they're much more obvious, and you'll see that in some of the other pictures. And then there's what's called the peaks. That's where the mid-upper lip comes to a point on each side, and the columns go into those peaks. And that's consistent. You don't see a column going this way and a peak over here unless there is a cleft. Then you get some changes. This is called Cupid's bow, this V-shaped area here. And if the upper lip is better formed, sometimes this area will retrovert, and you will see a little trough as the columns go upward. So I'll be repeating a lot of this stuff as we look at some of the cases. This is just an example, a better example of the columns going up. They go, a lot of people think the columns go into the columella. They go lateral to the columella. So you see this one here, and this one here, and here you see this lady, the columns are not well developed because she doesn't have as much in the way of peaks, nor does this girl for that matter, but hers goes up to here and here. These are called mounds. The apicularis ori is the muscle that forms the philtrum, and it's formed by the medial nasal process here and the maxillary processes that come in on both sides. There's two muscles, one that goes on top, one that goes on the bottom, and they help give contour to the groove in the columns. Mori, in 2005, did a very simple thing that hadn't been done. He gave characteristics to the columns. And he said there's triangular columns, and then parallel, forget the ED. Concave, which is basically an incomplete triangular. I'll explain and show all these to you. And then a flat philtrum, which is basically absent or severely hypoplastic. And his division has been used by others with some variation since. A lot of this has to do, the interest, if we didn't have cleft lips and palates, there'd be no interest in the filtering. Because almost every article is written by people who are interested in repair of cleft lip and palates. Because the whole purpose of the repair is to get the columns lined up so after they're finished with the repair, you have a normal looking philtrum. And there's all types of techniques they've used. Some are more successful than others, and some of the successful ones don't work in certain situations. But that's why there's an interest in the philtrum at all, is the repair that's needed and then the anatomy that they have to know to be able to do this. You can make fun of my clay images here. I spare no expense for these talks. To orient you, this is the columella, nares, nose, column, groove. This is the upper lip. These are where the peaks should be, and this bend in here is the Cupid's bow part. Of course, this is the mouth. This is a triangular philtrum, and here's an individual, I think she's a model, who has a triangular philtrum. It's fairly short, but you can see that it comes into the columella at a triangular manner. Here is a parallel philtrum, same all the way down. We tend to have parallel philtrums more when there's a wide peak distance between the peaks, and it does not narrow at the columella. Here's a child who has a parallel filtrum. One of the problems that we're going to have with the filtrums is that there's a tremendous variability in the population. So not given that, then you would expect tremendous variability in the abnormal population, the population we see with craniofacial defects. And there is. But occasionally we'll find a syndrome that has a recurring configuration, and that can be useful. And we, on even rare occasions, we'll find one that is so unique that it stands alone. And we'll talk about some of those. Here's the filter trough that you sometimes see. It's not only wider here and narrow here, but deep. It's almost like you could drop 3 or 4 drops of water in there and it would stay. People with large lips or turned up upper lip will have bigger troughs. And then you see the broad filtrum, again, not something that is not found in normal individuals. By the way, every physical characteristic I'm telling you about has been measured, both very crudely and by a laser. So if you ever want to measure these, then there are normals you can compare them with. I think it's more trouble than it's worth, but who knows? Then the broad filtrum you can see on the right. Again, most broad filtrums are associated with wider mouth, and there's no particular syndrome, although I'll show you a few that there's some increased frequency with broad filtrums. And you can see examples of the filter trough in the little girl on your left and the wide filtrum on the right. The narrow filtrum is simply the columns are closer together. That usually makes the groove look more narrow or deep, particularly deep, whether it is or isn't. And there's measurements for deepness in the filtrum as well. And then you go over to the hypoplastic filtrum where you're losing the column's borders. This is one of the next steps before you get a hypoplastic or missing, particularly missing or a simple filtrum.
So when you have a hypoplastic filtrum, would that be associated with drooling or anything?
With drooling, no. Nope. Here's a normal, she's a model by the way, which is unusual because their filtrums are usually very attractive. This is, to me, not an attractive filtrum, but it's still narrow like I pointed out here, although her filtrum may be a little bit short. One of the things that I want to show you is these two pictures don't match because I haven't fused or didn't fuse these upper borders of the columns. But sometimes the hypoplastic filtrum will fuse before the lines get up to the columella, and that's called concave configuration, which is a triangular filtrum that's not fused all the way up. Absent filtrum, you don't see any anatomical markers. If you do, they're very faint. This is classic for the fetal alcohol syndrome, which was one of the few disorders that drew attention to the filtrum because it was a fairly consistent feature. He does have minor identification of the lower columns right here.
So do you ever see a smooth filtrum in the normal population, or is that?
A short versus small?
Smooth. Absent.
Smooth.
Yeah.
No.
We don't.
No. That
So
doesn't
it's
mean
only
there isn't.
associated with fetal
I have not
alcohol.
seen it, and I haven't seen it published.
Okay.
So once you get to the smooth filtrum, there's something different. That's why I wanted to take a picture of Dr. Skinner. Because as far as I can tell, he has a smooth filtrum, but he's got that deep dimple. But you have to be careful. If you're making judgments on the filtrum, the person can't be smiling, can't be contorting his or her mouth. It's not an easy thing to do, which might be a reason why a lot of people don't spend much time on the filtrum at all. But that's important to do, and some people who have some lateral buildup here can smooth out their filter ridges pretty well.
So, you know, we hear about smooth filtrum and fetal alcohol syndrome all the time. So what do you think is the mechanism for?
I think it's a growth mechanism. In order to have filtral abnormalities, you almost have to have some aberration of the migration of the orbicularis oris muscle.
Mm-hmm.
And there is some suggestion that fetal alcohol affects migration of the neural crest into the face and contributes the majority of the facial features that we see. That would be my best guess, but I don't know, nor does anyone. And the partially fused one, the concave, here we have the fusion. Here we have the fusion, but we have a little bit deeper trough sometimes when that happens. Now, you'll see asymmetric filtrums noted, and you can see that I've drawn or used my clay, but this one isn't going where it should go, it's going in a diagonal manner. And then this is model, and this is a model, you can see that look like they're going off to the side. People who have this, either there's a fusion at the superior border of the ridges, or just a minor contortion of their mouth can alter that appearance. So generally speaking, there's not much value or correctness in the asymmetric filter. I could talk a lot about other things, and maybe sometime I will when I do the mouth configuration, but this fusion line, you will often see a crease here. Many people have creases here, and you know that that's where the frenuli attach to the lip or the buccal mucosa, both superiorly and inferiorly. And then you'll see people who have extensions of their dimples and creases up toward the midline of the lower lip. There is a relationship between the facial development and the midline, and it's very complex, obviously, and something that I want to pay more attention to as I see more individuals. So, what are some general filter observations? An absent filtrum is rarely found in normal humans. To answer your question, I'd say rarely found because there's somebody out there, there always is, that has a simple filtrum that is perfectly normal otherwise. Maybe Dr. Skinner. MCA syndromes can have variable filtral shapes, so very few people have looked at syndromes like Down syndrome, like trisomy 13 syndrome, like Rubinstein-Taybi syndrome, for their filtral configuration, and then looked at a large number of them, let's say 100 to 200, and see if their filtral configuration is different from other people, or it's repetitive and within a normal range. So as time goes on, we'll not be able to do that. When the nose is high up on the face, the filter groove tends to be narrow or simple. But I have seen exceptions to this, which would include Williams syndrome, who has a high set nose, but a wide filtrum. So this is a very tenuous generalization. When the nasal tip or lower half of the nose is upwardly distorted, malformed, or absent, the filtrum is often hypoplastic or absent, as you've seen in some of the patients and the gorillas. Syndromes with parallel filtral grooves. Many myopathies have that. The lower part of the face, the lower part of the filtrum laterally is tinted, and so that widens out the filtrum. You see it in Prader-Willi, Moebius syndrome, and Carpenter syndrome, among others. And here you see a group of individuals who have widened ridges and tinted faces or mouths because their muscle tone will not hold up their face. These people are usually also devoid of any flexion creases of the face. Syndromes with narrow filtral columns. Oculopathodictyal syndrome 2, Peter plus, Johansson Blizzard, Appert, Seifert, Chosen, is just a few examples of syndromes that are pretty consistent in their filtral configuration. I might mention, I did not mention this in the chin talk, that the dimples and creases are about 3 times more common in males than females, for whatever reason. Here's the upper picture on the left is a boy with type 4 cutis laxa. It's been reported a number of times with narrow philtrum. The child on your right is a Schenzel-Gideon child, and you'll see some more pictures of him. They've been reported with fairly consistent narrow philtrums or hypoplastic. The child on your left lower panel is an oculopalatal syndrome type 2, which is the same as type 1, but it's more severe, and they typically have a narrow philtrum. And then the Chilcott-Rott syndrome, which the mother in The Simpsons has, if you didn't know, has very little in the way of philtral development or very narrow philtrum. Syndromes of hypoplastic and or absent philtrums, FAS, trisomy 13, Friedman-Sheldon, Schillbach-Rock also, frontal nasal dysplasia, and numerous others. The upper column with the 4 pictures is a Schenzel-Gideon individual, and you can hardly see the philtrum here in the picture. The girl on your right is nursing her affected baby with whistling face syndrome, and she also has no philtral development, even though they have marked lower chin creases and lumps. And then you see a point we've been trying to make, that when there's a distortion and malformation of the nares, the philtrum is usually simple, hypoplastic, or missing. Here's a child with nasal agenesis that has a missing philtrum as well. Not missing, but hypoplastic or simple. Syndrome with short philtrums, 4P deletion most famously. 22q11.2 deletion, or BCF syndrome. Trisomy 9 mosaic. Rieger's, which is a mesodermal dysgenesis of the dark of the eyes with a short philtrum and conical teeth. And Settler syndrome you've already seen. Cohen syndrome, and I'll show you a picture of that. And the floating harbor syndrome. So these are syndromes that are pretty consistent in their philtral malformations. The girl on your left is normal, but notice she's smiling and she has a short philtrum, and you notice the crease here. This is a girl with Cohen syndrome, short philtrum. The philtrum otherwise is within normal limits, although you can't be sure from this picture. The Settler syndrome, which is an ectodermal dysplasia with the temporal skin missing and mental retardation. And then the floating harbor syndrome with a very, very short philtrum, which is a good marker for this disorder, along with the nasal configuration. Syndromes with long philtrums, Williams, DeLange, TRP 1 and 2, and 2 would also be the Langer-Gideon syndrome. Freeman-Sheldon, cutis laxa 4, 3Q deletion, and 9P deletion. A lot of syndromes with long philtrums. The one on your left is Cornelia DeLange. Note, they have a high set nose, but they have a hypoplastic philtrum. The individual on your right is Johansen Blizzard with the nasal hypoplasia and very poorly developed philtrum. And the nasal hypoplasia is usually in the inferior borders of the nose. And then you can't see this. It's my fault as much as it is the angle. Trisomy 13 with basically no developed philtrum as far as anatomy is concerned. And then this child is TRP2 or Langer-Gideon syndrome with simple philtrum. So if you're seeing these syndromes and you don't see the philtrum or pay attention to the philtrum, you may be missing a useful feature. It's like trisomy 13 that has a very simple philtrum, but it also has a bulky nose. So there's little features that you don't pay much attention to. You think about cardiac defect, the missing eyes, the extra fingers as the syndrome, but some of those near 100% features can be more valuable than the less 100% features. Syndromes with unique triangular philtral columns, the branchioculofacial syndrome or BOF, and then the pseudo-cleft lip. We've known for years that we can see patients whose philtrum looked like they were trying to form a cleft but fused before that happened. But that's been a guess. But there is this syndrome, branchiootofacial, that in which there are clefting of the lip and palate, in which sometimes the individuals don't have overt clefting, they have these unusual ridges. And the top two are the ones I want you to look at right now. They both have branchiootofacial syndrome. What you may be able to tell is this is wide at the base here, attached to the peaks, going in narrow, and more elevated than usual, more defined. Here's a reverse, where this is a verse V, but still coming from the peaks. This was trying to form a cleft, but never was successful. Then the child on your right has a very wide philtrum. And note that the trough here, the indentation, the peaks are poorly formed. That's when you get wide philtrums more often than not. And then here's a girl with a very singular hypoplastic philtral groove. That's common for Apert syndrome, one of the craniosynostosis syndromes. Why that is, no one knows, but it is a feature. Then syndromes with broad philtrums, RSCOG, 9q deletion, and increased in autism. And I have a picture of this, but there was an article from about 7 years ago that said large number and felt like those individuals had large philtrums. It's not something that I've been able, not large, wide, that I've been able to look at. The boys in the upper two have RSCOG syndrome, which is a syndrome with hypertelorism, web neck, in this case a broad philtrum, pectus excavatum, short hands, short stature, and overriding scrotum. And that's been a pretty consistent feature. And then the girl at the bottom has 9q duplication, I believe, or deletion. That's been found in about half the patients, and then a child with a known disorder with a very broad philtrum. Again, with the broad philtrum, you tend to get a diminishing angle here, so the lines come into the peaks, but they're very wide apart. And that may be because the mouth is wider and the peaks are stretched out. I don't know, but there is a relationship there. In summary, philtrum grossly understudied. In many malformation syndromes, much less normal individuals. And the main problem is its usefulness is that the very shapes, except in extreme cases, can be found in normal people. And the other thing is people haven't studied the philtrum enough to develop normals for its architecture. Not its measurements, but its architecture. Okay, questions or comments?
Brian, do you want to comment on the labial frenulum?
In what way? I know it's been looked at as far as its relationship to the fusion of the philtrum and clefting.
Talking about midline defects, that can sometimes one of your clues could be an absence of the that central labial frenulum.
Yes. No, I'm aware of that, and I'm not buying into a lot of people think that a central cleft is related directly to a unilateral clefting. It's just a confluency. I think it's a totally different thing, and it has different meanings, particularly relative to brain development.
I totally agree with you on that one. I think that, let's call it a typical unilateral or bilateral cleft is totally different than a midline cleft.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions? Comments? All right, go out there and look at philtrums.
Thank you, Dr. Hong.